it's appropriate if we start big. So what's the biggest premise that we look at why you're here today? It has to be the Bible. So let's go to Esther 4:14. For such a time as this. That's why you're here. Even when you experience defeat, even when you don't see your conviction carry through, for such a time as this. And then we go to Hebrews 4:14 and we see the words, hold fast to the beliefs we profess. That's why you're here. Thank you for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That's where it starts. We hear those words, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration. We're talking about unalienable rights. We're talking about rights given us not by politicians, not by legislators, not by people, but by God. And by God, that is why we're here today. We don't stop. We do not stop. We cannot stop. Friends, every day, every week, every month, I see patients with cancer. Just imagine, if you would, for a moment, a patient I saw within the last couple of weeks. On the right side of his belly, he's got a bladder bag because his urethra will never work again. And on the left side of his abdominal wall, he's got a colostomy, and that will help be life-sustaining for him. He made the decision to be able to prolong life, and that was his decision. I have taken care of other patients who have declined the same decision that he might have made and said, I am not going to live the remainder of my time that way. The common denominator in this situation was that each of these patients got to choose. And that's what it's all about. When we talk about health freedom, we're talking about we get to self-govern. We get to govern the decisions that we make. What are the ingredients of health freedom? What are they? It has to start with autonomy. It has to be the right that we get to govern ourselves. The patients I just referenced, they might have been offered radiation. They might have been offered chemotherapy. They might have been offered surgery. They might have been offered a chemotherapy that doesn't work in the typical toxic manners, but instead relates to an immunotherapy mechanism. But they chose. Can you imagine having a physician sit down with you and say, oh, by the way, the cancer you have, the discussions we've held, the considerations that we've gone into, don't worry about it because you don't get to choose. The government has decided for you, or the insurance company has decided for you, or your formulary has decided for you. You don't have to worry. You don't get to choose. We cannot imagine that world, and yet we wonder if we aren't starting to live in a world that starts to resemble some of those possibilities. So let's talk about the ingredients of health freedom. It starts with autonomy, but it also has to be about availability. If you don't have the availability as a 12-year-old to get a new kidney that you need for life continuation because you didn't make a choice that someone else wanted you to make, how can we possibly say that that's okay? And if you don't get to, if you will, decide whether or not you do something and then someone says, well, you can't come into our facility, how can we think that's possible? It has to be available. And then at another level, it has to be affordable. The idea that you might pay more than someone else for the same procedure because someone didn't like the choices you made is almost unbelievable. And yet we're living in a time where we're seeing some of these considerations come right in front of our eyes. What are some other ingredients of health freedom? It has to include informed consent. And the lawyers may make informed consent complicated, but it's just two words. And the first word is informed. That means that we need to provide for you the information you need to make an informed decision. Bottom line. No lies, no name calling, no disparaging you because you might think that the origin of an organism might have been here and someone else might think that it was here. Someone else might be studying it for reasons other than curing humans of human maladies, and instead might have been looking, how can we make such an organism function in a different way? All of these things are things that we're concerned about today, and that's why you're here. So we look at autonomy, and we look at availability, and we look at affordability, but we have to look at informed consent. You need the information, and then you get to choose. Consent means voluntary, and it has to be voluntary. It has to be. This is not a time where we need to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm not going to talk with you because you disagree with me. I'm going to hold you in contempt. This is a time to simply recognize mere, straightforward facts. In 1976, we had a swine flu epidemic, and we had a robust president who came out and said, we're going to have this vaccination program in place, and it's going to take care of you. But with 53 deaths and dozens of cases of Guillain-Barré, that program was suspended and never restarted. Today, we have a vaccine out that the CDC itself has indicated that 20% of the reported deaths through the VAERS program occurred within 96 hours of receiving that. 20%. And if there's 20,000 deaths reported through the VAERS program, and 20% of those, according to the CDC, have occurred within 96 hours, that's 20% of 20,000. You're talking 4,000 deaths are time associated with this vaccine. That isn't to say that we can prove anything, but it is to say that you have every right to your beliefs and to stand up for your beliefs and to say health freedom matters, and when it comes to informed consent, I get to choose, particularly in this one. You've got to have that right. My friends, there's one more thing we have to think about when it comes to health freedom, and that's the issue of confidentiality. What happened to your privacy? What happened to your ability to conscientiously or religiously make a decision, and then it got taken away from you? And in some situations, you were forced to leave your job. You may well have been forced to step away from being able to take care of your family. What in the world has happened when it comes time for confidentiality? You are losing the very privacy that we have always said was part and parcel of HIPAA, and a lot more. And lastly, I would tell you this. A phrase that stands strong in American history forever has been e pluribus unum. And if you remember, out of many, there is one. And out of all the stakeholders in the world of healthcare, whether we're talking about insurance companies or government or big pharma or whoever, there is one stakeholder that gets to champion their own decisions about their health, and that's you. And you get to choose. You are the stakeholder that matters. You. And I want you to know something. When we talk about health freedom, the twin sister or twin brother of health freedom has to be parental rights. Because the same ingredients I talked about, autonomy, availability, affordability, informed consent, confidentiality, you being the key stakeholder, is exactly what parents are entitled to, who are parenting their children, making the decision for their children, and nobody can step between you and your child. The government is not a co-parent, cannot be. And in closing, I want to remind you of this. This is not a partisan issue. This is not about Democrats or Republicans or independents. This is about the American Constitution. This is about the Bible that governs our lives. This is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I stand in front of you committed to standing up for parental rights, health freedom, and building bridges. So help me God. Thank you so much.